For those of you who are, this is your first time here, my name is Latricia Vaughns. I am the Research Development Administrator for the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Basically what I do is I assist faculty members and occasionally students with finding funding opportunities that are related to their research projects or research interests. I also provide grantsmanship training and things of that nature. I also oversee our internal award programs. So basically, today's presentation is going to go over the basics of research collaborations. And it's not going to be like a super thorough presentation because that would take longer than the allotted time, but just some basics just to get you guys, if you were interested in pursuing a research collaboration, just to give you some ideas of what to expect, what you should be out on the lookout for, and just some things to get you started on how to best pursue a research collaboration. So just to give you a brief overview, we'll be going over reasons as to why you should collaborate, some basic forms of collaborative research, which a lot of you might be familiar with, or you might see them on a regular basis and not realize that it's actually a research collaboration. We'll also go over some common issues in collaborative research, as well as how to manage your expectations and some common agreement types that result as, or that come about as a result of a collaboration. So basically, a collaboration can be considered anything with an equal partnership between two or more faculty members with mutual interest in a research project. Not also not necessarily just faculty members. It takes many forms. It could be with non-academic researchers as well, and so. Basically, you want to collaborate because number one, recent trends in funding favor collaborative research, specifically interdisciplinary research where you have multiple disciplines involved in a research project. And collaborations can strengthen the research just from the inclusion of expertise from fields that you might not be familiar with. Say you're working on a project or you have a research idea and maybe you're not, one of your strengths is not, let's say like data science, but you might know of a colleague who specializes in that. And so that could actually strengthen your research proposal should you pursue grant funding. So in essence, the likelihood of funding is increased because you're strengthening your proposal by pulling in elements or researchers that are more knowledgeable in fields that might not be one of your strengths. And also, you can expand your professional network through research collaborations. And basically, what you have to remember is every research collaboration starts as a conversation. You also have to remember that you're going to have more conversations than you are collaborations, but that's okay because the more conversations that you have, the bigger your network grows. And eventually it might come to a point where you in talking to someone, maybe it might not have resulted in a collaboration, but you might be able to recommend that person to another colleague, or should your research interest expand, you might be able to fall back on that person and collaborate with them at a future date. So there's also the possibility for innovation and discovery. Breakthroughs can be made, when research taps into other disciplines. That's why I always tell people to be open-minded about when you're looking for funding opportunities. A lot of times people tend to stick within a restricted area of research, but one of the things that I love about my job is finding those funding opportunities that might not be as specific to what someone might be looking for, but gives them the opportunity to expand into other areas while still holding to the interest of not only the sponsor, but of the faculty member. So just keep that in mind. Always be open-minded. Again, not every opportunity or research collaboration will be a good fit, but just be on the lookout for ways that you could be innovative with your research. And sometimes that does include, collaborating with someone else. So some common forms of collaborative research may include use of another researcher's resources. So basically, let's say you're conducting research on, or you have a research project, but you don't necessarily have the lab resources available to you, but a colleague at another institution might have those resources available to you, so where you could use their equipment or their lab space. So that's one form of collaborative research. Another one is researchers from different departments at the same institution. This is the most common form, especially from what I see. We have especially within class, a lot of our research collaborations take place within class, but it might be, a researcher from Health and Human Performance collaborating with someone from psychology, or collaborating with someone from communication sciences and disorders. So it's just, there's an interesting mix sometimes. For the most part, people do branch out. I know psychology tends to branch out into other colleges. But for the most part, like our social science disciplines within class tend to work with other social science disciplines within the college. Also, there's industry partnerships. Again, like I mentioned earlier, not all collaborations are strictly academic. You could have, say for instance, a pharmaceutical company that partners with an academic researcher from optometry, or from pharmacy. So those types of partnerships do also happen. Another form of a research collaboration could be a global partnership. We had a faculty member that was working on a project that consisted of collaborations from researchers at other institutions in other countries. And the reason for that was to offer differing global perspectives on a common research idea. And so they were trying to get perspectives from, from the American perspective, and I can't remember specifically the countries that were also targeted in the research, but it just helped to enhance the research proposal to have those other perspectives from different countries. And so also another common form of collaborative research is faculty and student collaborations. A lot of times faculty will work with students specifically on certain special initiatives to conduct collaborative research. And if you're more interested in that, I believe you might be able to find more information on that in the Office of Undergraduate Research, but I'm not specifically sure. I can get more details on that. So some common issues in collaborative research deal with investigator roles, differing personalities, and research styles. With regard to investigator roles, some things that might come up and cause issues are, assigning credit or assigning who's going to publicly speak for the collaboration. Oftentimes that can cause friction. So that's one of those things that you kind of want to have figured out beforehand. Another issue that might arise with regard to investigator roles is how to identify and rank authors. And this is one of those things that it's different for every field. Some fields feel that if the collaborator had full participation in the research project, then they should be granted authorship and credit, whereas other disciplines might feel like, even if they didn't have full participation, they still get authorship and credit. So it just depends. Again, that's one of those things you kind of want to work out before the collaboration is solidified. And then also, there might be a difference in research styles. you know, some investigators might be more formal, whereas others might be more informal. And that kind of goes back to different personalities, as far as, you know, relational styles. You know, some, and I've seen this happen, you know, some collaborations start from a handshake, you know, and then there's some where it's super detailed, everything is in writing, you know, there's a plan in action. So again, get a feel for the person. Again, every research collaboration starts as a conversation. Get a feel for that person, and go from there. Again, every institution is different. This has more to do with, like, you know, some different ethical considerations, institutional oversight. What might work or what might be allowed at one institution might not be allowed at another. So those are some other kinks that might have to be worked out before a research collaboration is solidified. So these are just some things to think about beforehand. So with managing expectations, again, like I said earlier, a lot of these things have to be worked out beforehand, and it's going to take more than one meeting. It's going to take one or more meeting with collaborators to kind of iron out all the details, but the responsibilities of each researcher should be clear and discussed upfront. This is usually when collaboration or a team agreement comes into play, which often summarizes roles and responsibilities. So some things that you might expect are research goals, objectives, and approaches and methodology should be discussed and agreed upon beforehand. Absolutely should be agreed upon beforehand. What you can do is maybe determine the strengths of each researcher and create an action plan that's based around that. Um, again, you should have a written contract developed by collaborators, detailing all of the roles and responsibilities um, that will be included in the research proposal if funded. Um, and again, with managing expectations, expect that some adjustments might need to be made as the project progresses. Um, those types of things aren't necessarily set in stone once you first decide to do the research collaboration. But again, as the project develops and as you're funded, you know, some things might need to be tweaked a little. So just be prepared for that. Again, like I said earlier, authorship and credit can potentially be a cause of conflict amongst collaborators. However, let's say, you know, something happens, a life change happens for one of your researchers to where they're not really able to commit as much time or allocate as much time as they did before. Concessions can be made, and they should be discussed in the event that the collaborator can no longer dedicate time to the project. So again, like I said earlier, so as the project develops and grows, some things might be tweaked. That could potentially be one of those things. And you also want to manage expectations surrounding intellectual property. Those considerations are really important because they could, for example, potentially involve inventions discovered as a result of the research. So you definitely want to have something into action that fully defines expectations surrounding intellectual property. And I'll have a link at the end of the presentation for a resource from within U of H that gives you more insight on intellectual property. It'll come from the Office of Research Integrity and Oversight. Or no, I'm sorry, from Technology Innovation. And so, yeah, intellectual property might also include like licensing rights. With regard to like data usage, it can also be owned by the researcher or the institution. So that's one of those other considerations that you need to think about when managing expectations. And access to data is really important because it aids in, future proposal submissions and scholarly publications. So you want to make sure that there are clear and detailed expectations surrounding that, so that you don't create any hurdles later on, should one of the collaborators want to use the data, found within the research project. As with most funded research projects, data retention is one of the most important aspects of the research. And it's especially with federal funders, oftentimes it's required. So yeah, just to get you thinking about, what you can expect. That's basically just, a rundown of what usually pops up during a collaboration. And so some common agreement types that you may or may not be familiar with, subawards, which I'm very familiar with. I used to set up subawards when I was a post-award analyst. And then also intellectual property, data sharing plans, which I'll also have a resource link for that as well at the end of the presentation. You might be familiar, may or may not be familiar with material transfer agreements as well as facility use agreements. So essentially what a subaward is, basically, say you have the prime institution. Let's say U of H is the prime institution, and we are awarded a NIH grant. Well, we want to transfer some of that work to another institution, say, I don't know, maybe UT Health Science Center, maybe because they have the capabilities to do part of the work that we don't. That constitutes a subaward agreement. So U of H would be acting as the prime institution, whereas UT Health Science Center would be acting as the subrecipient. And those almost most definitely 100% require a formal agreement. Usually with regard to subaward agreements, the terms usually include payment terms and things about financial reports. With regard to intellectual property agreements, those typically tend to target inventions that may arise as a result of the research collaboration. So if there's going to be anything like that, most definitely you will probably have some type of agreement in place. With regard to data sharing plans, it needs to explain how the data will be used and shared. Some things that typically are addressed in a data sharing plan, usually like the length of the agreements, the intended use of the data, any usage restrictions, whether by usage restrictions as they relate to each institution's policies. Also, one more important thing is the confidentiality with regard to the data usage. And also, there might be things in there relating to security and how you intend to, or how the researchers intend to safeguard information. Those are really, really important things to remember. With regard to material transfer, this is basically, I'll say for instance, a researcher owns materials, whether it be like a chemical compound that they created or something like with regard to that. Usually they'll get like a request from a collaborator for a sample, and that's when a material transfer agreement is typically drawn up. And so it also provides for the protection of intellectual property. So a lot of these different agreement types, some of the terms within them kind of overlap with others, but your research administrator will be the best person to help you navigate who you need to talk to see which agreements would be the best for your research collaboration. So lastly, with facility use, like I had said earlier, this one is usually brought up when a collaborator wishes to use equipment or a lab space at another institution. Like I had mentioned with the subaward scenario between UH and UT Health Science Center, this is usually where a facility use agreement would come up. So who needs to be involved? And this is from all institutions. It's pretty standard across the board. Again, there might be some slight variances, but I can almost always tell you that your research administrators or your research liaison officer, like we have at class, will always have to be involved. Number one, they're helping you. Our research liaison officer is the person who helps you actually submit the proposal. And so if there are other collaborators involved from other institutions, most of the time, each institution's representative research administrator will communicate with each other to get all of the kinks ironed out. So you absolutely have to have the research administrators involved. They have to be in the know of what you're proposing to do with your respective collaborator. And I can tell you there have been times where research administrators were not notified about a potential research collaboration where a proposal was being submitted, and all of the paperwork and things like that had to be completed last minute, and it was a pretty stressful situation. So don't do that. So again, make sure you're informing the proper personnel of your intentions of a research collaboration. And this would also include financial officers. A lot of times that's usually, in my experience, that's usually like the director of like grants and contracts, or the director of like pre-award, or I'm sorry, not pre-award, but usually like the grants and contracts officer, because they have to sign off on all of the financial documents. They're basically essentially signing not only for you, but on behalf of the university, like legal binding financial documents. So they absolutely have to be involved. But chances are, if you've involved your research administrator or your research liaison officer, they will already be aware of it. So that's why it's always good to go to your first point of contact. And then also, your department chairs may or may not have to be involved. Again, this is from every institution. Every institution is different depending on the type of proposal being submitted, depending on the circumstances surrounding the collaboration, because not all collaborations are funded. I failed to mention that earlier. Not all collaborations are funded, but rule of thumb, it's always good to inform your department chairs of things that you plan to submit for. So again, they may or may not be involved, but typically they are. So some things to remember. Current trends or recent trends in government funding do favor more collaborative research. That's a fact. However, collaboration should make sense. Don't go into it thinking, well, I need a collaborator to ensure that I get the grant, or I need a collaborator to boost my chances. Don't go into it thinking that way. There might be a funding opportunity that you're trying to apply for where a collaborator really isn't needed. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't just go looking for a collaborator just because you think it'll boost your chances of being awarded. Collaborations they can and can't, they may or may not be an added burden depending on how much groundwork you do, how much communication you do with potential collaborators. So just be really mindful of that. Just because that's the trend doesn't mean that you absolutely need a collaborator or that you need a certain type of collaborator. So everything you do with regard to collaboration should make sense. Also, you want to remember that your communications with your collaborators should be discussions versus lectures. You're both, or however many collaborators are involved in the research project, the ultimate goal is to take something away from it, to enhance your knowledge of something maybe that you didn't know, and to basically come away from the experience, you know, with the idea that you created something that could potentially move your discipline or their discipline or all of your disciplines forward. And so this is more of a communication thing. You want all of your communication with your collaborators to be in the form of a discussion, because that's how ideas are formed. That's how ideas are formed, and that's also how problems are solved. If you treat it more of like a lecture, you're telling them, what needs to happen, what needs to take place. 9 times out of 10, the result of that is possibly friction or a misunderstanding or a miscommunication of what you're trying to accomplish. So be very mindful of that. And again, I can't say this enough, collaboration start with a conversation. Last semester, class did an inaugural speed networking event where we invited collaborators or researchers from different colleges on the campus to come together and kind of, talk to each other and kind of get a feel for, what their colleagues at other colleges are into, what some of their research interests are. And it sparked a few conversations that did ultimately result in collaborations. So every single collaboration starts as a conversation. Don't be afraid to reach out. In the event that you are, personnel like myself are here to help you. I have facilitated quite a few connections. Some didn't really result in a collaboration, but that person now had another person that they could potentially use as a resource or bounce ideas off of. So I have no problem assisting with that if you ever feel like you want to talk to someone, or you need to find out if we have a certain person that works in this area that you might need assistance with, please, please, please feel free to contact me with regard to that. And class actually has a faculty directory where it lists all of the research or faculty in our college that conduct research or have research interests. And so that's another tool you could use if you're looking for a collaborator, because I know it's really hard because we have so many faculty members. It's really hard to know who does what, so that kind of puts everyone in one place. So these are some of the resources that I have mentioned. The Office of Technology Transfer, they deal with like intellectual property and things like that. And then the data management and sharing, this is an important one because that comes up a lot in a lot of federal awarding agencies. So let's click on that one. So yeah, this basically gives you a rundown of what to expect, explains what data management actually is. And it's a really good resource to use once you get to that part in your research collaboration or in your research in general. So yeah, this is an excellent resource for you guys to use. And I believe there's, and you might have to look a little bit on this website, but I believe there's a link to a site that helps you put a data sharing plan together or a data management plan together. I think, here, let's see. I don't see it on here, or maybe I'm overlooking it. But yeah, I can, if you want that information, you could just email me and I can find it for you. And so let's also look at this one, the Office of Technology Transfer. This also gives you more insight into what the office does. Like I said, patents, copyrights, trademarks, patents for inventions and things like that. So yeah, these are some really good resources for you guys to use, and that's the staff. So what I was talking about earlier with regard to class and our faculty directory, a lot of people don't know that this exists, but I want to point it out to you because it's a helpful resource. Bear with me 1 second. So if you go to the class website and you go to the faculty staff tab, come down to faculty research expertise, and it will show you basically like a database of all of our faculty and all of their different research interests. And you can use this search bar, let's see, to type in keywords, and it'll pull up all the different faculty that have keywords in their research interests related to what you search for. So this is a really good tool if you're thinking about collaborating with someone, or you have an idea but you're not sure who you could potentially collaborate with. This is a good resource to use. Other than that, I don't have anything else. Are there any questions from anyone?
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So if there's no more questions, I'll end it here. And again, if you think of a question after the fact, please feel free to contact me. Hope you guys enjoy your Easter weekend.
Thank you. You too.